Right. So I'm going to talk a little bit, about specifically how you can create an authentic performance for animation. And one of the most important lines, I think, is act interested instead of interesting. This is something that I grabbed directly from an acting class that I took a couple of years back, and this is one of the first things they tell you. And it's because you don't have to be pantomiming or outwardly, mechanically expressing a lot of emotions. You can get a lot of emotions from your face, from your posture, and you don't want to upstage or take the attention away from another performer. You want to be able to direct the audience's eye. So a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about comes back to that, is telling the story that you want to tell. At the start of the scene, you need to know the intention of the scene. What is the message or emotion you're trying to communicate? If you're not clear what you're trying to say with it, then the audience might not be clear on what you're trying to say either. And I always like to kind of check myself when I'm doing scenes and think, how else can your acting choices be interpreted? So if you'll find some things, some gestures, some postures read one way to one person, but might read another way to another person. So it's good to get other people's opinions, and you'll always get notes and stuff from directors and leads and stuff like that. We want to know about subtext. We want to keep subtext in the forefront of our minds as we're crafting our performance, right? What is the implicit meaning of a character or a scene? That's what subtext is. The character might be saying one thing, but they actually mean another thing. Body acting and speech should contrast each other generally. That's how you get subtext. So, when the character is saying, I hate you, for example, but if their eyes are kind and they're saying with their face that I actually love you, that creates that contrast. And that's what subtext is. And the greater the difference, the more depth a scene will have. So let's talk about subtext a little bit more. By definition, it's an underlying or often distinct theme in a piece of writing or conversation. So the dialogue is what the character is saying. The subtext is what they really mean. And the irony is the difference between what the audience knows and what the characters know. That subtext is what we want to really try and push for, is to get a little more depth in the characters, some subtext. Really understanding what that is helps. So how do we do that? Creating subtext in a scene. You want to consider what it is the character is thinking versus what they're doing. And, this goes back to knowing what they're doing, what the scene is, right? Definitely helps. Write down their inner monologue. What are they actually saying through their body language? Written down the actual line, and then written down what they mean, what you think the actual meaning of the words are outside of what they're actually saying. You want to then find specific acting choices to convey the intent of the scene through the contrast in the dialogue. So I always say act to the subtext. The line will always be the line. Act to the subtext. So sometimes when I'm shooting my reference, I'll take a pass where instead of saying the line, I write down the subtext and say that out loud and try acting to that. And sometimes you get some really interesting results because you're not, decoding or acting to the line as it is on the surface in a literal sense. You're getting to the subtext, to the real underlying meaning of it. Specificity. You hear me talk about this a lot. Knowing your character, conveying the intent in a way that is unique to them. This goes back to the Big Hero 6 exercise I showed, right? The characters walk into a room, and they each do it differently. And thinking about, how your character would do it. Knowing all the details about them, their age and gender and social status, all that stuff will help you make these choices and find specific choices for it. We'll touch again a little more on specificity, but we want to craft a performance that fits your character. Know your character's traits. Again, this is how a character would react in a particular situation. Search for acting choices that are unique to that character. Understand the meaning of gestures and try to avoid cliches. But certain things, like if you're just doing this when you talk, like a lot of people use this gesture when you talk, it can work, but it's pretty vanilla. You know, it's been done. Like this person's talking, and then they're talking over here, and in this pose, like we call it the W pose. And you have a character like I can't quite get in the camera, like doing this W pose. We're going to try to avoid that. It just is seen quite a bit, and we want to find specific traces that only this character would make. And the best way to find those is just to really observe real life, observe movies. Like this is why drawing from life is great. Going into public and drawing people in coffee shops and observing how they interact. I know it sounds a little creepy, but you can do it, and you know, draw on your sketchbook and you know, record these interactions and really think about how they work and how they're specific, and then bring that to your work, you know. But like just store those kinds of weird little things away in your mind, and then try and pull them out at different times and add them to your characters. You know, those little tiny details about how a person acts are great, and they can show real character and specificity. And then finally, execution. You know, the mechanical side of this thing, posing, arcs, polish, body mechanics. You know, if all this stuff isn't working together to create the illusion of life, then it doesn't matter what acting choices you have in the first place, right? Because the audience is going to be distracted by, you know, what they're seeing, or maybe not sure of what they're seeing. So you want to be able to speak clearly in your language of animation. So there is another aspect to acting, which is caricature, and that is exaggerating attitudes that need to be in order to communicate what needs to be communicated, and simplifying or removing unnecessary actions. So when we're looking at reference, for example, you don't often want to copy it frame for frame exactly, because live action, you know, life has lots of little details that make sense because it's real life. But in animation, you want to refine those movements and find only the ones that you need in order to tell your story. It's kind of like if you've ever seen people draw caricatures of other people. They exaggerate features like a nose or ears or mouth on somebody because that's what they see. And it's like taking what they see and putting it through their artistic lens. And on the other side, you get this exaggeration, this caricature. And acting should be an extension of that. You don't want to just take things verbatim, right? You want to put your spin on it.